A couple remains behind bars accused of keeping their own child in a makeshift cage.
We've seen cases like this where people are locked in closets for years, locked in cages for years, or parents lock the children in the home, don't let them see other people, don't let them go to school. Um, so it made me think a lot about that type of psychology, that type of pattern of behavior.
Iowa parents Dustin Perry and Lindsey Hamilton are both charged with negligent or abandonment of a dependent and child endangerment. According to the Fremont County Sheriff's Office, the case unfolded on July 25th, shortly before 9 a.m. At that time, they received a report of a small child alone wandering along a roadway outside of a home in Hamburg, Iowa. Deputies say the young child, who was just 4 years old, was covered in filth, and it was a disturbing mixture, as the 4-year-old was covered in human and animal feces.
We do see it often that children who are abused are mistreated, they lack basic hygiene, basic nutrition, basic human contacts, human warmth, no hugging, no nurturing type of touch. Often they're not spoken to, so they don't even have the benefit of speech, and they have speech delays because their brain is not hearing and recording the normal amount of speech you need to actually develop language. So it just makes me think about extreme deprivation and neglect. And if you do that to a child, they're going to be filthy, right? They're going to be filthy. They're going to have stool and urine accidents. They are going to be touching things and getting dirty. No one's cleaning them.
The discovery of the young child would lead deputies to inside the home, where they discovered another child inside, and both children were taken to a nearby hospital for evaluation. Deputies confirmed Perry and Hamilton were both the children's parents.
It made me think about the most horrible types of abuse that I've seen in my career.
Authorities say Perry and Hamilton's 4-year-old son had developmental disabilities. Psychiatrist Dr. Zeev Cohen explains children who have disabilities are at a greater risk and suffer more abuse.
Sure. So, when you look at cases of severe abuse, of course, it can happen to any child, but children who have disabilities are at particular risk. They suffer more abuse. It may be because they're more challenging to care for and they're more dependent. And parents who are not suited to be parents or did not want to be parents or have mental health issues, or parents who harbor a lot of resentment towards their children may particularly take it out on a child who has a disability. And so we see that a lot. And I think that if these allegations are true, it just makes one think about parents who have very angry, sadistic impulses towards their children. They try to exert total control over the child, but but beyond total control and beyond trying to put the child in a place where they're not going to inconvenience the parents. Beyond that, there's also an extreme degree of cruelty and callousness and sadism, which cannot be discounted. And so it just reminds us that these types of impulses do lie deep within the human psyche. We all have them, but most of us do not act on them, and certainly not towards our children. So of course it's very disturbing. And I think for folks who don't deal with child abuse and don't see cases like this often, it can be quite shocking. And of course it's shocking even to those who deal with it a lot.
The Fremont County Sheriff's Office would reveal more shocking details. The children were left in the care of relatives with the direction to keep the 4-year-old boy in a makeshift cage. Deputies located the cage inside the home. They say it was constructed out of a pack-and-play, a baby gate roof, and zip ties. And from that makeshift cage, the young child was able to escape and leave the home without waking anyone up.
It probably would not have come to light, or at least not for a long time. So often in these cases, the way they're discovered is the child becomes old enough and breaks free, alerts a neighbor, alerts a passerby.
But those weren't the only disturbing details. Deputies then discovered a second homemade cage where Perry and Hamilton allegedly kept the child in a walk-in closet. Dr. Cohen explains this could indicate how Perry and Hamilton normally kept their children.
Well, it certainly could be the case. What it makes me think about is, when children are born and when they're very young, they're quite helpless, and it's very easy to lock them in a makeshift cage or any type of situation like that. And so This seems like it's pretty careless. They just decided we don't, if these allegations are true, it's too much for us to deal with this child. We don't have much, compassion for this child. We just want this child out of the way, and just improvising sort of callously this type of device. And then also, though, not really taking the time to think that as this child is getting older, that device is not going to contain him anymore, and that he could run away. And in a sense, even though it could sound kind of paradoxical, of course, that cage is horrific, but the fact that it was so poorly put together is also an indication of the neglect, because they left him with strangers in the cage, and he was able easily to escape, and he could have been struck by a car. I mean, this is a young child walking by the side of the road. So the haphazard kind of makeshift nature of that cage is just a further indication of, I think, the kind of warped and twisted thinking of whoever put it together.
After the horrific conditions were discovered, both Perry and Hamilton were arrested and charged for the heinous crime. According to deputies, the Iowa Department of Health and Human Services removed several children from the home.
But of course, in this case, these parents are, if these allegations are correct, they're really endangering the life of these children. I mean, these children cannot be expected to live for very long in that environment. So there's really no option. And so I do think that if these allegations are true, there really is no option but to permanently remove the children and to really terminate parental rights. There's a process for doing that, but I would find it hard to imagine that that's not what would happen in this case. Often the kids will go to grandparents or other relatives. If in this case there is no one who can step up, then we hope that they'll find a warm, nurturing home down the line.
Perry and Hamilton are both being held in jail with no bond, which Dr. Cohen says he's not surprised.
I'm really not. I think that when you have very heinous crimes, that's typically the case, and you also might consider these folks to be a flight risk. They did leave the child and travel elsewhere. And so I think that it makes a lot of sense to keep them secure.
There's a lot in this case that remains unclear, including how long the child was kept in the makeshift cage before breaking free. And why did this allegedly happen?
I think that, this case is a terrible one, and it just reminds us all about how vulnerable kids are. I often think how amazing it is that human beings are wired to really care for children. And so, human children come into the world completely helpless and defenseless. But relatively few of them, obviously it's large numbers from a public health perspective, but relatively few of them are abused and neglected, right? Most people are cared for through all these helpless years. And so I think, though, but what cases like these remind us how vulnerable, children are, and that we do need to have systems in place for when the natural kind of human impulse to take care of our kids fails or goes wrong, which unfortunately happens all too often, and to have greater supervision. So I think one thing that would be interesting to understand is, how did this happen? Why was this missed? Now, these children are very young. They're not really school aged yet. Were there older children who were school aged that maybe there was a school that did notice that those children were neglected? In other words, could there have been an ability to intervene earlier in this family? So I think that that's really a lingering question here. In every case like this, we want to think, how did we miss this?
As for Hamilton and Perry's children, including their 4-year-old son, Dr. Cohen says their road to recovery from the alleged abuse could be challenging, but it's still possible. There's hope.
Well, we certainly know that children who are the victims of abuse have much higher rates of mental illness and also physical illness, things like diabetes and hypertension later in life. So this is going to have a ripple effect on the rest of their life. And I'm talking specifically about the abuse that they've suffered. At the same time, some kids are more resilient than others, and that's something that we don't really understand scientifically, why some people are more resilient. So you'll see people who have undergone horrific abuse who really seem very well adapted to their life, in later years as adults, and really able to have good, healthy relationships and a focus on their career and don't seem as affected by it as you would expect. So those outliers, those resilient people, we don't really know a lot about them. We don't understand exactly how they come about, but we do know that they exist. And so, hopefully these kids will turn out to be more resilient than not.
Dustin Perry and Lindsey Hamilton both remain at the Fremont County Jail without bond, pending their first appearance in court. According to the Fremont County Sheriff's Office, more charges are pending in the case. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.